If a picture is worth 1,000 words, why do the world's leaders still rely on words alone to get their most important ideas across? Today's guest built an entire patented framework around that question. Todd Cherches is the CEO and co-founder of Big Blue Gumball, a TEDx speaker, a member of Marshall Goldsmith's elite MG 100 coaches, an award-winning professor of leadership at NYU and Columbia University, and the author of Visual Leadership. Today, we're going to talk about the power of visual thinking, how a decade in Hollywood shaped one of the most original leadership methodologies in the world, and why the lens through which you see might be the most important leadership tool that you're not using. Todd Cherches, welcome to the Grateful Podcast.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for that great introduction as well. So I really appreciate it. So we're going to be talking about my visual leadership today, but also we need to give a shout out to our mutual friend, Chris Schembra.
Yes.
Gratitude and pasta. I always show gratitude for people who help you out, because if not for him, we wouldn't have met. So shout out to Chris.
100%. Super grateful for him. Super grateful for you. And you know, the intro that I just gave you, I went over your highlight reel, and there's still more things to add. You've done so many amazing things. You've had so many amazing accomplishments. But I think sometimes that the way we introduce each other on podcasts and have our bios written on social medias, it can paint an inaccurate picture of our lives. And there's so many people my age, a lot of my audience is younger and wants to be great leaders. They want to be amazing, and all they see is the success, and they can compare themselves to that and feel less than. So walk me through how you started, how you got here, because you didn't know that you wanted to be a leadership coach from the beginning. That wasn't even in your mind, right? And you got here through hurdles and through stories and through making your way. So how did this all start for you?
Yeah, what's interesting is that's exactly right. We know people's bios and their resumes, but we don't know is what's the gaps between the the bullet points on the resume, right? So, and I always say a lot of times, we're going to talk a lot about metaphors. We always use the metaphor of having a career path as if it's laid out for you as some like stepping stone walk in the park. And I would say my career was more of a roller coaster. That's the better metaphor, with ups and downs, twists and turns, exhilarating highs, terrifying plummets. So, I mean, I've been laid off numerous times. I've been fired a couple of times. Like, people don't see that. That's usually not included in the official bio, right? But
Yeah.
what I do with my students, because I teach leadership at both NYU and Columbia, in my final session at NYU, I pull back the curtain, which is a metaphor, and reveal my whole background and bio from start to finish. And my students are always amazing, because a lot of times we put our professors on a pedestal, and we assume they were always on track for that. And people assume, oh, you must have been the captain of the basketball team because I'm 6'4". You must have been the class president, and nothing could be further from the truth. I never in a million years thought I'd be doing a TEDx talk or teaching at 2 universities or doing
Right.
public speaking. So yeah. So if you watched my TED Talk, I don't know if you have a chance, but I talk about how when I was growing up in Queens, as a little kid, people would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say, I want to be Superman, right? Because I was a TV addict. I love Superman. I always put on my mother's dish towel and fly around the house. But they said, all right, if you can't be Superman, what's your backup plan? And it was Batman, right? So that was my only 2 career options. But when I got older, I realized I loved television. I was obsessed with television. So I wanted to do something in the TV industry, but I didn't really know what, because I didn't know anyone who ever worked in that industry. So I got a bachelor's degree in English literature, a master's degree in communication, and then after a year of working in advertising in New York City for Ogilvy and Mather, one of the top ad agencies, I decided to move out to LA, which is one of the biggest, bravest things I ever did. Just like you're moving to Paris when you were 16 or so, right?
Yep.
Think about what it took to, 1, make that decision, 2, tell your parents this is what I'm doing, and have people say you're crazy. And yet, right there, I'm sure that transformed your life in ways that you never could have anticipated if you hadn't
100%.
taken that huge leap.
Yeah.
So similarly, when I moved to LA, I didn't know what to expect. And my first job out there, I needed a survival job just to pay the rent. I applied for a job as a waiter, which I had never done. But they said, we don't need any more waiters, but you're tall. There was a restaurant and bar, a nightclub. So I was hired as a bouncer. So I worked nights as a bouncer in a nightclub,
Wow.
behind the velvet rope with the clipboard and, the suit and tie and everything else, and checking IDs. But that, even though I talk loud and fast, I'm from New York, I'm an extreme introvert, so that really pushed me out of my comfort zone. I felt like I was like playing
Right.
the role of a bouncer. And but that, again, these life experiences, if you just say yes to something, you never know where it could lead, right? It boosted my confidence, and it paid the rent and sustained me while I did internships and part-time jobs and temporary jobs until I finally landed some real jobs in Hollywood. So I'll stop there for a second, but that's like my origin story of where things started, from the time I was in school.
Yeah, it's so amazing. Something that someone told me a while ago on my podcast, his name's Chad, and he talked about how he lives his life is he'll pick a direction and he'll take a rock and he'll throw it. Here we go, visual representation, right? And he'll throw it as far as he can in one direction, and he'll walk toward it, right? And then he'll get there, he'll pick it up, look around, and say, okay, where do I want to throw it from here? And so when I made my leap and I moved to France at 16, and when you moved to LA, that was kind of the rock. We chucked it and we got there, and we're like, all right, I'm here now. What
Yeah,
do I
now
do?
what, right? Yeah.
Right. And so, from my understanding, one of the biggest moments for you in your early career is when you had to move to China. And this is kind of when I can connect a lot, where you moved there and you had no ability to speak or communicate in the normal sense, in the way that you had your entire life through words, right? So
Mhm.
you had to start to understand communication on another level, on a deeper level, and that was visually. I know that when I got to France, I'd been the best in French class through high school, but as we both know, American foreign language classes in a public high school are not the greatest.
No.
So
No,
I
I
thought,
took Spanish for 4 years and remember or spoke very little, complete,
right,
yeah.
it's how it works. So I get there, and speaking with my host family, I learned to read facial expressions better and to represent things with my hands and to show. Now I have the benefit of Google Translate, or I can show pictures. But walk me through what was it like for you when you got there? I can't imagine being in a foreign country where the language is so different, right? Because we're talking French and English. There's some cognates and similarities. It's so different alphabet, different culture, no Google Translate. What was that like for you as a young man?
Yeah, yeah. Well, one, I wasn't as young as you were. Far from it. I was actually 30, but that was my first trip ever outside of the United States. Also, I didn't move there. I just went there for 2.5 weeks to oversee this installation. So I went there with two people, an electrical guy and a mechanical guy, and we had to install these audio animatronic robotic figures in the cultural theme park in Shenzhen, which is just over the border from Hong Kong. And at the time, it wasn't the high-tech hub that it is today. It was really agricultural and industrial, and no one there had ever seen a Caucasian person before, had never met an American. No one there spoke any English at all.
Wow.
And so they assigned us a translator, but he barely spoke English. So there was a lot of, like you were describing, body language, facial expressions, hand gestures, and then drawing. When we needed things, I would actually pick up a pad, and even though I suffer from ICD, I can't draw syndrome like most people, but I was able to draw stick figures, and I was able to sketch things out, almost like playing Pictionary, and we were able to communicate non-verbally, and get the job done. So it was really that was like my visual thinking origin story, because made me realize that if you use visuals, it helps to overcome language and cultural barriers. And that's why some of my teaching, 80% of my students at NYU are international students, mainly from China. So my teaching really resonates. So I translate that to my teaching, so my slides are very visual, my metaphors and analogies. I think, all right, what's something they would understand, and how do I translate what I'm talking about into a scenario that would resonate with them? So again, it's a different way of thinking and framing your communication. So it's thinking visually and communicating visually. And my catchphrase is, how do you get people to see what you're saying? So everything I do revolves around
Right.
teaching that and coaching that.
So when you were in China and you're kind of learning how to communicate visually, I mean, not every way is equal, right? If I'm just like moving my hands around like this, you're not really getting any picture.
It's a lot of
So,
pointing. It's like, all right, is it this big or is it this big? Is it this
okay.
high or is it so? There was a lot of that kind of pointing and gesturing, and also just again our spatial expressions. Because if you don't smile, people think you're angry, right? So it's kind of like
Hmm.
just being aware of that and trying to see what I call flipping the eye. Try to see things from the lens of the other person and see how am I coming across, and am I resonating with the other person.
It's kind of how we, I guess, talk to animals. We use a lot of
Ha!
tone with them as well. But like when we talk to animals or babies, we still try to communicate. We're still using words, but it's less about what we're saying and more about how we say it. Do you ever conflate those two?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I have 2 puppies right behind me, so if you hear them barking, that's why. But, yeah, like, my dog was walking the other day, I just held up my hand, I said, "Stay, stay." So it's a combination of tone of voice and hand gesture, and my other dog, we taught her to go up, so we'll say, "Up." So now we could say, "Up," and she'll go up even without the hand gesture, but at first we had to do the hand gesture. And pointing, I was actually reading about that, like, dogs are one of the few animals that if you even chimps don't go to where you're pointing, but with my dogs, if I point and I lead them with my finger, they will follow that. They'll know where to sit. So it really is. That's a great analogy. It really is amazing how the brain works.
Interesting. So after China, what was your next step? You kind of discovered this new way of thinking, a 2.5 week immersive experience. What happened next? How did your life change afterward?
Yeah, well, just to rewind the tape for a second, another metaphor. So when I first moved out there, and while I was doing the bouncing job at the nightclub, I interned at Aaron Spelling, one of the top TV producers. Then I got a job in casting at Columbia Pictures, and then I was in comedy at Disney, and then drama at CBS. So I was working and trying to develop TV shows as an assistant. So I never broke through to the manager level, but I had amazing experiences working at TV networks and studios and going to wrap parties and taping. So that was amazing. That was just like the whole Hollywood thing. But then one of the recurring themes was I had terrible bosses. They were all kind of
Interesting.
um, like they were all, how can I say this, authoritarian. One of the core values of Hollywood, in addition to creativity, is it's about ego and power and control and money. That's like those are the values. That's what motivates people. And not everyone treated everyone really well. So I had a lot of really bad bosses. So I needed to. The worst one was at the TV network I was working for. So a friend of mine said, "Hey, we need a project coordinator here." And he knew I was desperate to leave that job because I was so miserable. So even though my dream was to work in television, I said, all right, I can always go back to it. And I never did. So it's kind of like the Robert
Interesting.
Frost poem, The Road Not Taken. You know, you come to a fork in the road and you have to choose a path and you figure, oh, I can always come back. But we never come back because there's that quote, the Greek philosopher quote from Heraclitus. He said that a person cannot set foot in the same river twice because it's not the same river and you're not the same person. Right. So I love that quote. So like even if you think, oh, I'll come back to this TV network or I'll come back to television someday, we make decisions, we go down a path, and we never know where that could lead. Just like your rock throwing analogy, right? You never go back to where you threw the original rock from. You go into the next. You keep throwing it forward, right? So I worked in television. Then I got into the theme park company, which is when I went to China. When I got back, unfortunately, the company went bankrupt and had to lay most of the people off. So I was out of work, and I was like, what am I going to do with my life? I was out in LA for 10 years, and I just decided to move back to New York. And I moved back to New York, and I had no idea what I wanted to do for a living. And I ended up with a job at management training company, and they asked me they wanted someone to revamp their mini MBA training program, and I did that, and the light bulb went off. Metaphorically. In fact, I keep my light bulb here on my desk just to remind me.
Great.
So the light bulb went off, and I realized that management and leadership is an art and a science, right? Management is more of
Hmm.
a science, leadership is more of an art. So all those made me reflect on all those horrible bosses I had, and realize none of them ever had any training, none of them had any coaching, none of them probably ever read a management or leadership book, which is why they were such horrible managers and leaders. So that's when I got obsessed with management and leadership development, and that's what I've been doing ever since. At first, always behind the scenes, because I always say I'm a 3B guy, a back of the room, behind the scenes bookworm by nature. That's who I am. But we were just talking beforehand. I was once overseeing a management program down in Hilton Head, and the trainer didn't show up because he was sick. He missed his flight. So I had 12 CEOs there. We were doing a management training program, and I called my boss back in New York. I said, "What do I do? We have no trainer." He said, "You're gonna have to do it."
Wow.
And I was almost like, "Excuse me?" I said, I think there's something wrong with the connection because I think I heard you say I'm gonna have to. So I was, a relatively, not young, but I had never spoken in front of people before and done a training program, especially for a group of CEOs, and I did it. And I realized, even though I was terrified of and terrible at public speaking, I realized I wasn't as bad as I thought, and I didn't hate it as much as I expected to. And it ended up being a great experience. And then I took a public speaking course, and then everything changed after that. That's when I started doing leadership development and presentation skills training, and that led to my getting a job as head of leadership development for a Wall Street company, and that led to my teaching at NYU, and that led to my teaching at
Wow.
Columbia, and then my TED talk, and then my book. So it's kind of like, you never know. There's never one thing that's like the catalyst that changes everything, but it's the series of things that happen that leads from one thing to another.
Right. And if you hadn't been laid off, or if your bosses hadn't been bad, or if your company hadn't went bankrupt, or if your boss didn't show up or
Right.
did
Yep.
show up, none of that would have ever happened.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I love to talk about the most on this podcast, how oftentimes in the moment, the things that we think are the worst are what end up giving us the skills and helping us grow to become who we're meant to be and fulfill our purpose. It's like that's what true gratitude is, when you can be grateful for the things that in the moment were really difficult
Yeah.
and really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about being resilient. It's about bouncing back from adversity. It's saying, all right, what can I learn from this experience? My last full-time job, I was working for a company called LiquidNet. That's where I was the head of leadership development. I loved it. I couldn't have been happy there. And then the financial industry crash happened, and I got laid off. And I'm like, all right, what am I going to do now for the rest of my day or the rest of my life? And I ended up wandering up Broadway from Midtown all the way. I ended up at the Museum of Natural History, and I just spent just to like get my head around the reality. I just wandered around the museum and looking at the dinosaurs. I don't know if you've ever been to the Museum of Natural History in New York, but you have the big dinosaurs. You have that gigantic whale. It just kind of gives you a sense of perspective of like, all right,
Mhm.
this is just one of those things. It's like, all right, it's a setback, but what next? And then I could have either tried to get another job like that, or I went the other extreme and started my own company, and that led me to where I am today. So again, that's a great insight. Is like all of these, every decision you make and every experience you have is a stepping stone to what comes next. Like, so how do I bounce back from this? What can I learn from this? Gratitude for, even if you got laid off, you could be grateful for the 3 years you had, without which everything that followed wouldn't have happened, right?
Right. So I wonder, going back to your childhood dream of one, Superman, Batman, then TV, what was it you think in the dream to be in TV that maybe is reflected now inside what you're doing? Because I think that maybe your dream wasn't to be in TV, but that was the exterior expression of a deeper desire. And I wonder what that desire is and how it's expressed in the work that you do now.
Yeah, that's a great insight, because think about, what does Superman do? He saves people, right? What does an executive coach do? In many ways, they save people. What does a teacher do? They teach people, right? So it's about helping. It's about making the world a better place in some way, right? So what does Superman and Batman do? They're superheroes. And sometimes I say, I don't have Superman's X-ray vision, but I have visual thinking as my superpower. And I don't have Batman's utility belt, but I have all of these coaching tools, tips, and techniques that I've developed over the years, plus many I use, that other people have developed. So in a way, I'm still helping to make, my personal mission statement is helping to make the world a better place, one leader at a time. And to me, everyone is a leader in one way or another. So if that's my foundational mission statement, then it's like, all right, what can I do? So that's the framework I always have, is like, whether I'm teaching or coaching or writing, whatever I'm doing, is this going to help people improve? Is this going to solve a problem? Is this going to help make their life easier or better? Marshall Goldsmith's new book is called A Little Better Life, because he said, I may not change everyone's life, but if I can give them a better day or even a better minute, that could help them, right? So that mindset is about reframing. I said this to my students the other day, shifting from I have to do something to I get to do something, right? Just that simple reframing. You can say, I have to visit my mother this weekend, or I get to visit my mother this weekend, right? I have to do this report, or I get to do this report, because I'll be able to have some impact in that way. So again, a lot of it is just figuring out what's the purpose, doing things with a sense of passion and purpose. What's the purpose of what I'm doing? So that was a great question. Like, why the TV industry? One, it was fun and glamorous, but two, the Superman Batman thing is really about making the world, contributing in some way to making the world a better place.
Right. The biggest hindrance toward me making progress to my goals is my inability to monotask. When I'm doing something and I'm not making progress on it, I'll instantly switch to another thing. And then I don't make progress on that and I switch to another, perpetuating this cycle. But in the past week, this has all changed because this amazing company, Magic Mind, sent me 15 of these mental performance shots they have. And they've made such a big difference. I've had one each of the past 7 days. And it's really made me be able to finish tasks before I move on to the next. I have concentration that lasts longer because of the caffeine that doesn't just hit you all at once, but it actually hits you continuously over a 4-hour time period. It's made such a difference in my productivity, and I'd love for you guys to get to try it out. So if you use Wagoner20, the code Wagoner20 at checkout, it'll be in the description as well. You can get 20% off these shots and 48% off a bundle of 30 of them. What's your favorite way that you get to contribute? Because I know that I think that being a leader of leaders is one of the coolest ways, right? Because your ripple effect right now is so high. You might not even get to ever personally interact with the people that you are affecting, but if you're helping leaders lead visually, then you're helping the people that they lead and maybe the people in their lives. But what's the thing in your life that brings you the most fulfillment and the way of helping people that feels the best for you in this moment?
Yeah, when I see the light bulb go off, when I see the wheels turning, again, both are metaphors, when someone, a coaching client comes back and say, hey, I tried what you suggested or what came out of our session, and this is, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Yesterday at Columbia, one of the assignments is every student, there's 10 students in a class, every student has to read my book and pick one chapter, and you have 5 minutes to teach that chapter to the class. So
Hmm.
when you're writing, it's a very solitary experience, right? It's coming from your head onto paper. You say, this is going to go into a book that's going to be published and out there. You don't know if one person's going to read it or no one's going to read it or millions of people are going to read it. But to hear your ideas filter through the mind of, say, a student like in the class, and they had to talk about which chapter they picked, why it resonated with them, and how they could use it to be more effective. Every one of those presentations was just amazing. Just like, it's just to hear your own words and thoughts. Say, I love this model, and here's why. Here's how it changed my life or my thinking, or gave me the confidence or whatever to do X, Y, and Z. And I always frame things in terms of insights, actions, and outcomes. Insight, what did you take from it? Action, what are you going to do with it? Outcome, what's going to be better or changed as a result of it? So when you hear those stories, when you get that feedback, that's the most gratifying thing in the world. So it could be a blog post, it could be a LinkedIn post by a student who said, hey, I took Todd's class, I learned the passion skill matrix, I used it in this workshop, and this was what happened. It's just, it's amazingly gratifying.
So you get to work with so many different people, from leaders of big companies to college students. And uh, I know that when it comes to visually teaching people, everybody has different cues. As you said, like you think about the outcomes, and everybody has a more subjective outcome. So I'm curious, as you've developed this model and these frameworks, if you've figured out a way to effectively think about and frame the metaphors that you use, or the visual representations that you try to get people to see, so that it's most able to resonate with people.
Yeah, I break it down into 4 categories. It's visual leadership is the application of visual thinking to the practice of leadership. So that's the foundation. What do we mean by visual thinking? It's about thinking in pictures and images as opposed to in words and numbers, right? There's a concept called the picture superiority effect that says that when words or numbers and pictures battle it out mentally, our brains are wired to be drawn towards the visual. And in my TED
Interesting.
talk, I talk about attention, comprehension, and retention. When
Hmm.
you use visual imagery or visual language, one, it gets people's attention, it gets them to focus because they're looking at it, they're the connection there. It increases comprehension or understanding, and it increases retention, which is memory and recall, right? So when you use visual imagery and visual language, it helps you to become even more effective, both in terms of your thinking and in terms of your communicating. So it makes you a better visual leader. And I break it down to 4 categories. Category 1 is using visual imagery, which is pictures or props or anything that can be taken in through the eye, using mental models and frameworks, and that could be a 4-box matrix or a ladder or a circle, with any kind of visual representation. Category 3 is using metaphor and analogy, and category 4 is using storytelling and humor if and when appropriate. So if you combine those into any combination, it's even more effective, right? So if I
Hmm.
say something is just the tip, what you're hearing today about visual leadership is just the tip of the iceberg, right? If you picture an iceberg, we know that 10% is above the surface, the other 80 or 90% is below the surface. So
Yeah.
what you're seeing right now is just a small percentage of what's possible. So it's up to you to dive beneath the surface if you want to get better at this, right? So just if I say that's the tip of the iceberg, it's a common metaphor. We all know what it uses, what it means. But if you visualize it in your mind's eye, you really see, all right, what's that piece that I'm not seeing? Right? When you first meet
Hmm.
someone, it's just the tip of the iceberg. When you first start watching the 10 minutes of a movie, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So you always know there's more that you don't know and that you don't see. So if you start with that mindset, then you'll ask, all right, what am I missing? What am I missing? Right? What else is out there? So again, that's just one example of how using a visual image, which is also a metaphor, can help to frame your thinking. And again, it's about problem solving and decision making and solution finding and innovate. So again, it's a way of thinking that we often don't think about. Right. So it makes us more consciously aware and intentional and strategic in terms of how we go about doing all of these things.
Right, we have to be first self-aware of what images are in our head and what we're thinking about in order
Exactly.
to end up changing it. Are we in control of the images that we have in our head? I'm not sure if this is your area of expertise, but that's very neurosciencey. But can we control the pictures that are in our head? And are we able? This is a separate question, but are we able to see things that we haven't ever seen in the physical world?
Yeah, I mean, those are great questions. I know you study neuroscience, so I'd love to get your take on it as well. But yeah, I mean, we have images in our head. It's almost like having an earworm, right? You can have a song in your head, and my wife said, I have that stupid song in my head. I can't get it out. The only way to get rid of it is to replace it with another song, right? Whether you
Right.
listen to another song or hum another song, that's you kind of like bump it out of the way. Same thing. You can have a vision of something horrible happening, but you can replace that vision with something better, right? So like you could picture yourself. That's what meditation's about, right? I'm not a big
Right.
meditator, but the people who are expert in it, picture yourself on a beach and the sun is being down on you and the waves are crashing against the shore. You could get someone to visualize that. I was an English literature major as an undergrad, and you just made me flash back on William Wordsworth's poem, The Daffodils. And the idea behind it is when he's on his couch in a pensive mood, he'll say that image flashes upon my inward eye, right? You could take an image that you experience, think about it, and your body and your mind will re-experience the emotions of that time, even though you're not experiencing it right then, right? So if you're on a plane and you're going through turbulence and you have a fear of flying like I do, I need to get out of that mindset of, hey, this plane is going down, and visualize my getting to the destination, or my seeing my wife and my dogs when I get home, or something like that. Or you're at the dentist and you're sitting in that chair, and I just start thinking about and picturing other things just to take myself out of that experience. So yeah, so we do have control if we're aware of it. But yeah, it ties into meditation. But yeah, it's a
Hmm.
great question about the neuroscience of how we think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bob Proctor at all, but he always would talk about how we think in pictures, and it's the picture flashing in our mind that will end up dictating our motion, and then thus our action, and then our reality around us. And so, if we can control the picture that we're thinking in our mind, if we're consistent with uh, like picturing a goal that we have coming into fruition, then that will end up happening. And it reminds me of a quote that I heard you say on another podcast, which is that the leaders who can see the invisible can help inspire the impossible.
Yeah.
And I think that that's fascinating to me, that if we're able to communicate with others the things that nobody can actually see, but an idea that we want to make happen, we can kind of share that picture together and create that in reality.
Yeah. Yeah. A big part of leadership, and I mentioned this in my TED talk too. When I do word association exercises, when I say, leadership, what's a word that comes to mind? Vision is very often the number one most commonly mentioned word. What does it
Huh.
mean to have a vision as a leader, or any person? A vision is a picture in your mind's eye of a future state that's different from and better than the current reality. And I do a whole workshop on Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, right? He painted a picture of a better future, right? So through his words and his imagery and his rhyme and rhythm and his poetic language, he created this future. And there's two components to having a leadership vision. One is formulating it in your mind. The other is communicating it and getting it into the minds of others so that they could see what you're saying. So as a leader, if you want to motivate and inspire people, you need to paint a picture of what the future is going to look like and get people on board with that vision. And and seeing the same thing. So like right now, it's, I know we're both talking about baseball before we got on the air, and we're different fans of different teams. But all the teams right now, they're in spring training, right? What are they visualizing? They're visualizing that parade and that winning that World Series trophy in October, right?
Yeah.
That's the vision. That's you keeping the eyes on the prize. But if you're so focused on the trophy and not focused on the fundamentals of hitting and pitching and fielding and everything else, you're never going to get that trophy. Like years ago, I dated an actress when I lived in LA. She spent more time rehearsing her Academy Awards acceptance speech and thanking her parents than she did working on her craft of acting, right? So it's like if you focused on the prize and not on the craft, you're never going to get the prize, right? So a lot of times people are so focused on the reward that they're not focused on, putting in the hard work that it takes to ever get there.
Yeah, because without that base, you're never going to get to that point. It leads me to another question, which is, with most leaders right now, I'm imagining that they speak, and I see it in a way that doesn't communicate something visually. And I don't quite understand where the difference is between those who, I can feel the difference, I can see the difference between the inspiring leaders, the Martin Luther King leaders who paint a picture, who paint a dream, and those who are just saying words. But where does it differ in the craft of what are they doing differently? What are the great speakers and leaders that paint a picture in your mind saying that is different?
Yeah, I mean, we could spend hours talking about that. I mean, it starts with trust. Like, do you trust your leader? Do you have faith in them? Are they just, is that vision based in some reality, or is it just a pipe dream? Right. So it's kind of like, I think that's a big part of it. If someone paints a picture, let's say if the vision changes constantly and the strategy changes constantly, people lose faith in that leader, saying, "Oh, this is just the vision of the month, and I'm going to sit this one out." Right.
Mm.
As opposed to someone who says, "This is where we are. This is where I see us." Also, Dale Carnegie, who wrote the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, one of the great books of all time, he had a saying that people support a world they help create. So a big part of leadership is getting people on board with the vision. When you do that, and people feel listened to, people feel they had a say, people feel a sense of empowerment and ownership and accountability, they're more likely to help work towards making that vision a reality than if you just come down like Moses with the tablet saying, "Here's my vision, and this is, whether you care about it or buy into it or not, this is where we're heading." So it's like that's the
Mm.
challenge: is how do you get people to emotionally, mentally, physically buy into that vision and feel like it's our vision, not just his or her vision, right? So I think that's a big
Interesting.
part of it too.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is that if I want to inspire someone to see something and really buy into the vision, I need to make it rooted in reality, so not too far fetched that it
Hmm.
would be unachievable.
Yeah,
I'd need to be consistent with it, so saying the same vision consistently over and over again, not switching it up. And I would need to make them a part of the journey to reaching the goal, right?
exactly.
And it's less about what I'm saying and less about the words that I'm using, but more about how I frame it in a way that makes it consistent, real, and a group goal.
Yeah, vision needs to be inspiring. It needs to be aspirational. Needs to be so saying, we're going to increase shareholder value by 3% this quarter is not a vision. That's not something that gets people to leap out of bed in the morning and say, "I can't wait to get to work," and do that. But if people say we're changing the world, we're fixing a problem. In fact, I was just using this analogy in class yesterday. There's the classic one about the two bricklayers, right? They're both laying bricks. You ask the first one, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm laying bricks." You ask the second one, and that person says, "I'm building a cathedral, or I'm building a hospital, or I'm building a school,"
Huh.
right? So they're both laying bricks, same task, but one is going about it with a sense of purpose and passion, and the other person is just doing it as a task, checking the box and collecting their paycheck, right? So again, I think that's a big part of it too. How do you motivate and inspire people to higher levels of performance? But it can't be manipulative. It's got to be authentic and genuine and real, right? So you could trick people into doing things, but that's not what we're talking about. I know you're big on the word sustainability, right? So that come up a number of times in your profile. It's like, how do you sustain? Because it's hard. It's hard work, and there's going to be setbacks, and things might change along the way. But how do you sustain that vision and keep that dream alive in the face of that setbacks, whether it could be financial, it could be, stuff happens, right? Baseball season's a long season, right? What happens if your star player gets injured? What happens if, things could happen? How do you keep that vision alive and keep moving forward despite setbacks that may come up? So I think that's a big part of the leader's job, is to help get people through those rough patches, in addition to just, establishing that vision and then just walking away and say, all right, you're on your own, guys. You get it done.
What you said reminds me a lot of Simon Sinek's framework of starting with why, where I don't know if you remember the TED Talk, but he starts from the circle, and like Apple starts from not what, but why, and the vision and the ethos behind it. It's also great sales, right? I'm not just gonna say I'm gonna sell you these AirPods. I'm going to sell you the freedom to listen to music wherever you want and embody. That's really interesting. And I hadn't really thought of that in terms of creating a picture, but I guess that's exactly what great marketing is doing, or great leaders are doing. They're telling people why it's the bricks. I'm building a church. I'm not just laying bricks.
Yeah.
When did you kind of come across that? Because I think it's a really easy idea to read, right? But it's a hard one to apply. It's a hard one to understand beyond just intellectually.
Yeah, I don't know if there was a specific point or it's something that just happened over time. I'm a big book reader, so a lot of times people say, where did you get that from? A lot of times I will remember, other times I'm like, I have no idea. It's just in there.
Yeah.
When I got that job I mentioned earlier, was to revamp that mini MBA program, and I started reading these management leadership books. I got so obsessed and hooked on them. I've been reading an average of 50 books a year since, I hate to give away my age, but since 1998, I've been reading an average of 50 books a year, which is 52 a year is my goal, one a week. So I've read over 1,500 business books over the last 28 or so years.
Wow.
So, they're all in there, right? That's somewhere. So sometimes you forget, all right, who's, when it comes to quoting things or where they get something from. But I mean, a lot of this is just sunk in from a combination of life experience and work experiences and things I've read, and and my coaching clients and my students and everything else. So, but it's a great point that you make about, it's about brand, like when you were talking, I was thinking about the Steve Jobs, when the iPod first came out. Instead of saying this holds 5 gigs of data, which means nothing, but if it says this will hold 1,000 songs in your pocket, so you can leave your CD collection at home, that's what resonated with people, right? So it's like, that's the classic saying from marketing, is that people don't buy a product, they buy the benefits of that product, right? The
Right.
classic one is, no one needs a drill. What you need is a hole in the wall, right? So you can hang a picture or whatever. No one says, oh, I need a drill for no reason. So it's a solution. The product or service you're selling should be a solution to a problem that a customer has, right? Peter Drucker said that the number one responsibility of a business is to create, maintain, and serve and maintain a customer, right? So again, thinking about who's your customer could be, a client, it could be an internal client. Like, who are you serving? Like, we're all serving someone in some way. So as a professor, I serve my students. As a coach, I serve my coaching clients. So again, thinking about, how am I helping other people solve their problems or innovate, or that's a big part of what we're trying to do.
So as a professor at 2 schools, as a CEO and co-founder and coach, and then you're also on the side, you're still reading and you're still learning. Where do you make the time for all that? Something that I get a lot, I get asked a lot by clients, by listeners of the show, is like, where can I make the time to do everything? Because I want to spend all my time doing and applying, but I also need to learn, and I don't know how to balance all that. How have you managed to do that, along with balancing family and connections?
I mean, one way is I don't get nearly enough sleep, which is not healthy and not good for me. So I know that I'm a huge night owl. I know some people are morning people. I am usually up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning.
Wow.
Unless I have to get up at 7 or 8 for something. But I'm usually up late. So a lot of times I'll read for an hour before I get out of bed in the morning. Sometimes I'll read for an hour or two at night before I fall asleep. On the weekends, I may try to knock out an entire book. I read really fast, and I have that's a separate conversation, is how to speed read and while still remembering everything that you read. Anyone can just skim through the pages, but how do you remember? So there are techniques for doing that, including, making margin notes and highlighting and circling. But it really is about prioritizing I still watch Netflix shows and I still go to movies and things like that, but it's making learning a priority. I try to learn something
Mm-hmm.
new at least every single day, if not multiple times a day. I try to learn from my students. I always say in my classes that 1/3 of the success of our class is the content, 1/3 is my facilitation and teaching, and 1/3 is the contributions of every person in this room. So if I'm not learning something from each student, then we're letting each other down. So part of it is just always looking to learn, looking at every experience as a learning opportunity and say, what can I take from this? How can I apply this in the future? So it's just seeing things through the lens of leadership or through the lens of learning, whether you're watching the news or watching a baseball game or whatever, there's always something to learn. So I think that's a big part of it too, is like keeping your, or having that's part of the visual thinking mentality too, is what am I noticing? What am I not noticing? Right? Thinking about things and seeing them through a different lens. So it really is hard. It's just about prioritizing learning and development in your life. And sometimes you have to make sacrifices. I mean, you could easily scroll on TikTok for 3 hours and say, all right, I could have done 1 hour and read a book for the other 2 hours, right? So it's really about choosing how we spend our time.
Right. I've noticed that you're not, I mean, you have a big LinkedIn presence, but on Instagram, like you don't have a huge presence like a lot of authors and speakers do. Where does that?
I really should. It's like, that's one of the things that's been on my to-do list probably for 2 or 3 years now. I just haven't. I occasionally use Facebook, occasionally Instagram. I should be on TikTok more. Like if I had one thing that I was going to put at the top of my list, it would be to do more video content, putting my concepts out there and posting them on Instagram and on TikTok, etc. That's just, as a one-man show, it's just kind of like prioritizing. I can't do everything. And so you really have to be focused and say, all right, I know ROI, like what's the ROI of what I'm about to do? One of the chapters in my book is called the Future Self Question. Before doing anything or making any decisions, ask your future self, will my future self thank me or blame me for
Mhm.
what I am about to do?
That's great.
While my future self may thank me for having a better LinkedIn, a better presence on Instagram or TikTok, I just haven't had the time to focus on that. And if you're going to do it, you have to do it right. I just haven't had the
Mhm.
time. So like using AI more is a priority for me. I just haven't had the time to really. So I've dabbled in ChatGPT and touched on some of the others, but that should be a top focus for my own personal development. But again, when I'm teaching, like yesterday, I taught for 3 hours at Columbia in the afternoon and 3 hours at NYU at night. When I got home last night, I had no voice and I was about to collapse. It was just a lot in
Yeah.
one day. So a lot of it is seasonal. So I do a lot of things in the summer or in between semesters when I have some more time to focus on myself. Because like right now, I have 20 papers I have to grade by next week. So it's all about finding the time to, not letting the quality suffer, while trying to do too much.
Right. Well, honestly, I really respect it because I think social media for your clientele is also not like you'll find them on LinkedIn, but probably
Yeah.
not scrolling on Instagram.
Yeah.
And when thinking about ROI, there's people out there that are spending hours and hours trying to make the best content for TikTok and Instagram when they're the clients like they're never going to really see a return on that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All it does is look good to other people, but I know plenty of people that literally are not on social media and making eh, incredible amounts of money in the consulting industry. So I
Yeah.
do
And
I respect
that's a
that.
great point. Those things are nice to have, but they're not essentials. LinkedIn is where I belong. Like, that's where my clients are, my followers are. Before the pandemic, I had about 4,000 LinkedIn connections. I'm now up to almost 18,000. So, it's like that's where people find me. That's why I engage with people. So that's where I need to be and invest my time. And again, while it'd be nice to do more TikTok videos and things, it's like the ROI isn't there right now, right? So that's
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and talking to people that are like that do have hundreds of thousands of followers, what they did is they first got really good at one and then were able to branch off from there. But I think that having a one platform that you're really good at and like getting a lot of leads and making a lot of connections is like better than branching out and half-assing like five, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like,
Um,
while some people are very global, 90% of my business is in New York, right? So
right.
my
Yeah.
target is like, how do I meet gatekeepers and people who can bring me in, who sign a check or sign a contract. So my targets are HR people, L&D people, and C-suite people. Those are the people who say, hey, I'd like you to come in and work with this executive or do a team building offsite. So that's my focus, right? So it's New York City, it's people in that space. So I could have 1 million followers in some country across the world, in India, for example. That doesn't help me, right? They may have a New York-based company because I don't travel a lot at this point in my life and for personal reasons. When I was younger, I was fine jumping on a plane and going wherever. Now, not so much. So I need to be home and want to be home, close to home. So, right. So investing in building followership in another country where my customers may or may not be there and what it would take to, I'd rather have one person in New York say, I saw this post and bring me in and do a huge, engagement. That's the ROI I'm looking for. So that's a great point. It's all choices. There's no right or wrong or good or bad. It's just priorities and choices.
Right. My friend Jonathan Goodman, he's the author of The Obvious Choice, which is an incredible, incredible business book. And he talks a lot about building your, like, on social media, using it to community build the way that we used to have, like, people knock on doors or spend time in the neighborhood, so you get to see that person around, and that build trust. Like, oh, my neighbors are hiring them, maybe I'll hire them. And it's the same thing on LinkedIn or on Instagram, where you can have a smaller, tight-knit community, right? Like,
Yeah.
I know a guy that's doing incredible in the consulting industry with a much smaller following than someone that I know that has like 600,000 followers and has no business,
Yeah.
because it's the quality that you're building. So
Yeah, it's nice to have the
I think
bragging
it's really
rights to the
interesting.
numbers because it sounds impressive, but it's like, what's your goal, right? What's your
Right.
objective? Like, for example, there was someone I connected with on LinkedIn. I went to a local New York Upper West Side networking event, and he just happened to be there. And we met in person. It's like, hey, we connected on LinkedIn, and now he may have me on his podcast. So it's like those are the kinds of relationships, right? So we're all in the relationship business, really.
Hmm.
But one of the things, like one of my pet peeves is like a lot of people are using AI to write their posts and respond to their
Yes.
posts. And it's like, I don't want to waste my time with that because, the whole idea of social media is you're interacting with the person, you're building that relationship. So if my bot's responding to his bot,
What
what,
is it at that
yeah.
point? Yeah.
Well, I say this to
Yeah.
my students, if you're using AI to write your papers and I'm using AI to grade your papers, no one really needs to show up. I might as well just stay home and watch, a Netflix series, right? So it's like the learning comes from, and it's all about the relationships and the interconnections and how can we help each other. I just want to mention I have my 4Gs philosophy, which is be genuine, be generous, be gracious, and be grateful. Right.
I
So
love it.
that's the foundation. I teach a lot around servant leadership. The idea as a leader, your job is to serve others, not to be served. A lot of people don't have that mentality. But those 4Gs are really impactful. When I meet someone who embodies those 4Gs, it's an instant connection, right? They're genuine, meaning they're not putting up playing a role, they're not pretending, they're not, fronting or faking. That's who I am. What you get, what you see is what you get. So that's the genuineness. Generosity is looking to help rather than to get, right? And again,
Hmm.
sometimes things will come back and come full circle. If not, that's fine too. But when you meet someone, instead of saying, all right, how can this person help me? Start with the mentality of how can I help them? Right.
Yeah.
Again, it's just a little shift. Graciousness is being polite, being forgiving, realizing that we're all stressed out. It's about assuming positive intent, giving people the benefit of the doubt. And then, generous, grateful is just, I know you're big on that, and just having that attitude of gratitude and appreciation and realizing people aren't perfect and, appreciating the small things. So I think when you practice those 4Gs, one, it makes you more likable, it makes you more trustworthy, it builds relationships. And the people who don't do that are the people who I, don't necessarily get along with or want to do business with. So I just wanted to make sure we got that into our conversation because I figured you would appreciate that approach.
I really do appreciate it. I love that a lot. I think I heard you talk about that somewhere else, but I forgot to write it down. I
Yeah.
really appreciate you sharing. I really relate to, obviously, the gratitude piece, and my audience knows that, but the generosity piece I'd like to touch on, because I think so many people will do things for other people because they want something back, right? And they're like, I'm being generous. And they can even say, like, I'm being generous to be generous, but it's all because they want something back. And that's when they don't get something back. And it's this insane paradox, because once you start, the people I know that have started to give just to give, and it's
Hmm.
pure intention, they're not just saying I'm giving to give, but they're giving to give, they end up receiving it. Well, the people that are giving to receive, they don't receive. And it's this
Yeah.
crazy paradox. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've noticed it as
Yeah,
well.
definitely. Yeah, you want people who, Adam Grant wrote a great book called Give and Take. Sometimes people say, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you, right? As opposed to I'm just doing it because, one, it's out of the goodness of your heart, but again, it's a win-win, right? It's like one of the things that I do, I belong to the Marshall Goldsmith MG100 coaching community. A lot of people in that group write books. So I always buy every book and I write a 5-star Amazon review if it's worth the 5 stars. It's got to earn it. It's not.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I lose my credibility if I give everything 5 stars. And I'll do a shout out on LinkedIn. I'll say, hey, congratulations to so and so on their new book. Right? It takes it takes an hour or two to read the book, and it takes another half hour, 20 minutes or so to write the review and post and everything else. But people really appreciate it, And again, it's more than just, it's about, I call it going ABCD, above and beyond the call of duty. So it's nice to do, and it's helpful, and it's an act of generosity. But I also benefit because part of my brand is being a thought leader in the leadership space. So people say, they trust my judgment. They'll reach out to me for book recommendations. And I always say, be careful what you ask for, because if you ask me for one book recommendation, you
Uh-oh.
may get 100 or at least 10. But again, I'm always happy to do that because I have a passion for it. And that's part of that Superman helping, coming to the rescue mentality, right? So, but yeah, that's a simple act of generosity. Help someone out. And it's a win-win for everyone. It feels good. People feel valued and validated. And it's just a nice thing to do. And again, I get that from my parents. That's how they are. So that's kind of one of the core values I have, is giving back and, going above and beyond what people expect.
I love that. And a pattern that I've recognized that you just confirmed among the most successful people I know, the most fulfilled people I know, is they treat all their interactions and everyone that they interact with on this insane high caliber level. And they hold themselves to a standard to really, really come through for so many people, where it seems to the outside eye, like, how are you doing that? How are you
Mhm.
able to show up at this caliber for so many people? And that's how you build a reputation, and you end up being able to influence people and write books about these ideas, because you are truly living the life that you preach about. And I love hearing that you leave everyone a 5-star review. I've had a lot more people I'm connected with writing books recently, and I'm trying to practice the same thing. It can be a lot. I'm going to need to get some advice from you on how to read so fast.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I really do appreciate this pattern. I'm realizing where the people that are in the position that most of us young people want to be in are just doing the things that to most people seems unscalable.
Yeah, it's like in my classes, I'll write LinkedIn recommendations for my top 3 or 5 students, and it's not always the ones who got the A's. It's the ones that tried the hardest, who showed the greatest
Yeah.
improvement. So I think that goes a long way. Also, I have people coming to me now asking me if I could write a blurb for their book, right? And I always say yes, unless I have a real reason to say no. And again, the people, Marshall Goldsmith wrote a blurb for my book. Dan Pink, one of my top favorite authors,
He's
wrote
great.
wrote me a blurb. Nancy Duarte. So all of these people who are so busy and so well known gave the time to an unknown first time author. It's like, how can I not give that back and pay it forward, right? So that's part of my mentality as well, is just to say, all right, helping people who, doing the things for other people that only a few people have done for me, or that no one did for me, right? It's like with my students, I try to be the teacher that I didn't have. I had in all my
Yeah.
years of school, I only have teachers who were memorable. And when Chris Schembra asked that question, who are the people that you want to give thanks to? Mr. Patterson in high school, Mr. Ballantyne in high school, and Professor Berman in college. Out of all I don't know how many professors and teachers I had in school, but only 3 in all those years stood out, and they're all thanked in the acknowledgments of my book. I stay in touch with all of them, and this is 30 plus years later, and you let them know that the impact they had on your life. So I actually just got a gift. You can't see it from here. It's sitting on there. One of my students in China from 15 years ago sent me a gift saying, "I just want to thank you for the impact you had on my life." And it's this beautiful. It's a glass kind of sculpture thing with a Chinese panda inside it, sitting right by my window. It's like, out of the blue, a student from 15 years ago is still thinking about you. So it's kind of like, that's amazing, right? And I say that's why I do
Yeah.
it. So all the times I
Oh,
say, why do I do it? It's not for the money. It's not, and it's a lot of time and effort. But why do I do it? It's for the gifts. Send me the gift. No, it's the students that come back and say, you had an impact on my life. And especially if you still remember it all these years later, the way I remember Mr. Patterson. I mean, that's what it's all about.
I love that so much. It's that connection that is really at the root of human experience and what we love and that makes our lives memorable. I hope that after this, me and you, we can sustain a connection like that because I
That'd be
think
great.
that
And if you're ever in New
in
York, we'll meet up and for a cup of coffee or grab some lunch or whatever. I was saying I have a LinkedIn
100%.
connection. This guy named Benno in Liechtenstein. I didn't even know where Liechtenstein was on the map, but I looked it up. We were LinkedIn friends. We kept in touch for a few years, and he won a prize with 2 colleagues to come to New York. And I took the afternoon off and I showed him around New York. I took him to Grand Central Station. We went to the New York Public Library. We went to Bryant Park and hung out. So it's like, that's the kind of thing. Again, I'm an extreme introvert. So for me to do stuff like that is really pushing myself out of the comfort zone. But you create these LinkedIn connections and, online, it's just a profile. But when they show up and you meet them, it's just like, you have a new friend who's an admirer of your work and a colleague. And now when we connect on LinkedIn again, we already had that experience of spending, a couple hours together here in New York. So it's like one of those things that I could have said, all right, why bother? Why should I do? But it's like you just do it and it adds richness to your life. I think that's a big thing. It just, it makes your life better, the other person's life better. You're creating a memorable experience that bonds you. So it's just, I love that. I love, when I meet people in real life who you only know on LinkedIn or Zoom or whatever. It's kind of a cool thing.
100%. Yeah, it is one of the coolest parts about the virtual world that we can fuse them in a sort and really bring it to life and have these amazing connections founded on these platforms.
Yeah. This guy named Perry Noppert who runs the Octopus movement for neurodivergent, nonlinear thinkers based in
Mhm.
Amsterdam. He's actually going to be in New York to speak at the UN next month, so I'm going to meet him in person. So shout out
It's
to Perry.
amazing.
So I'm looking forward to meeting him, and other people in the community who are based locally are going to meet up as well. So not only am I going to meet him, but I'll meet probably another 10 or 15 other local people who are in the same movement of people who are, again, the unconventionals, the round pegs in the square holes, as Steve Jobs called it in one of the Apple ads. So it's, again, yeah, it's really fun to meet people who you have things in common with. Like I'll say to my wife, I'm going to meet an old friend who I've never met yet, or I'm meeting him
Yeah.
for the first time. So
I
that's kind of
love
cool.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Todd, this has been incredible. I've learned a ton. I know the audience has. If you'd like to leave the audience with one quick idea, what would that be? What is one step that they can take to help implement visual leadership into their lives?
Sure, thank you. That's a tough one, but what I'll do, I'm gonna respond. And again, but you were in France, so you'll appreciate the quote. The last line of my TED talk is the Marcel Proust quote that the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. So I encourage
Mhm.
your listeners and people watching, hopefully on YouTube, will start to see the world through a new lens. And again, you never know what you may discover if you do that.
That's amazing. Todd, thank you so much for this time.
Thanks, Jack. This has been great.